Hello, and welcome to the weekly reading. For those of you who've noticed that it's been coming on a Tuesday lately, that's just because I have a dedicated post for the moon phase. When it's a major moon phase on a Monday, I switch up the weekly reading date. So let's choose a card between 1 and 4 and dive into our weekly reading. The full moon will be next Monday, which will fall into this reading. And we just yesterday had the last quarter moon in Aries. The next full moon is not full moon, next new moon, next Monday on the 17th is in Cancer. And I am uploading a forecast on that on my YouTube channel for those who like to watch. So for this week, we are feeling the movement of Mars into Virgo. And we're just doing a bit of consolidating in the final week of the lunar cycle. So have you got your number ready? Let's jump in. Now, this is a really interesting reading because we have three consecutive cards in the swords deck here, suit here. We have the 9 at the end of the reading, the 10 at the beginning, and the page upside down. And they literally run in order, 9, 10, page. So there's a very, very strong nod to mental process, which is quite interesting with Mars moving into Virgo, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is how we think. And when Mars is in that sign, it's that we want to do things in a kind of methodical, precise, sometimes perfectionistic way, which may lead us to either procrastinating and not getting things done, or being so pedantic that we want to get it done exactly just so. And this Mars will be there for 2 months, but we always kind of feel that initial shift of a planet into a sign, especially a personal planet, in terms of our personal sort of functionality. We always feel that quite intensely when the planet first moves in, because it's a reshuffle for us of how we have been with our our Mars in Leo, versus how we're now going to be for Mars in Virgo. So I also feel like the beginning of this week tells us the promise of how we would like things to go, and then cautions us how things may go if we don't follow what we should. So let's look at the 10 of Swords as a starting point, and I'll give you the context of what I'm trying to say with that. The 10 of Swords it's always a bit of a difficult card. It's a walking away card. It's a cutting away card. Remember, swords being air, we have to cut something out. We have to cut something back. We have to prune. And I know the roses in the area are being pruned of late, and pruning them now means that they will grow and flower better in flowering season. But cutting back all those blooms can feel hard. And anytime we have to make big changes, it's difficult. And a lot of that suffering comes more from our mind than anywhere else. We suffer because we feel we should have, could have, wish we had, etc., etc. And so the story that we're telling ourselves is of failure. Oftentimes, I've failed, and so I have to cut back on that particular thing, or cut out that particular relationship, or that job, or that business has failed, and I'm walking away in devastation. But we can also change that around a little. We've got Pluto square the nodes. I mentioned this in the forecast. And Pluto really wants us to sacrifice the thing that actually is no longer serving us, but it's usually the thing we don't want to sacrifice. And if we can change our perspective on this failing as we walk away from something, rather as I got what I could from that lesson, I've learned, and I realize this is no longer, even though I might not really want to let this go, I know this is no longer good for me. And if we can do that 10 of Swords moment and walk away into the sunset, knowing that the sun will rise anew and new beginnings will be offered to us, which is kind of what the 6 of Pentacles is saying. It's our only other card that's not in the sword suit. And Pentacles is materializing, and this is very much a card of give and take and reciprocity and balance, the fairness of, if I want to purchase that, I'm going to give you something that is of correct value. I'm not wanting to overpay. I'm not wanting to underpay, just as I don't want you to overpay me or to underpay me. So the whole idea for me with the 10 of Swords following up after I don't know what's happened to my language, I can't speak, but with the 6 of Pentacles following the 10 of Swords is what I'm trying to say, is that if we find the way to walk away, to sacrifice, to release, to shed, to prune, use any word that really resonates with you, the doors will open to a better balance of reciprocity, of giving and receiving, and materializing a lovely level of abundance in whatever way, shape, or form that might take. However, if we struggle, Page of Swords, to change that story, if we struggle to shift the perspective, we may walk away from the thing, but then the story is still going to be the same. I failed, or so and so did this to me, because we can have a lot of not taking accountability with Page of Swords in reverse. So the Page of Swords, and pages are always kind of messengers or heralds of information. So if you could see yourself falling into Page of Swords, you might find yourself saying, it wasn't my fault that the business failed. It was actually X, Y, and Z, or the relationship failed, or whatever. So either you could find yourself in the state of not taking responsibility and blaming somebody else for something that actually internally you feel a failure for, or you might find yourself surrounded by one or more people who are not being accountable and who are continuing to tell the same story that isn't necessarily fully true and isn't taking accountability. So this is a caution, because in order to get the 6 of Pentacles balance of reciprocity, we actually have to change the story. We can't just walk away from the thing and still be stuck in an old story that isn't working, because that's going to lead us to the 9, which obviously in sequence would be the first of the Swords cards numerically, is then we get stuck back in the anxiety, stuck back in the nightmare, stuck back in the fear and overwhelm and inability to cut away, inability to wake up and see what is real, what is actually happening here. We're still sort of stuck in the illusion or that dream world. You know how dreams are so sort of subliminal and surreal and hard sometimes to understand. That's such a powerful way to work with your unconscious self, to work with your dreams, to see what they're trying to tell you. But at the same time, it's not black and white when you dream. It's never clean cut. And I must say, Virgo is exactly that. Virgo wants everything to be in its perfect little neat columns of black, and then, this gradient of gray all the way to white. Like, let's not muddle things up. Let's not muddy things up. And so with Virgo, and Mars at the moment, it's this opportunity for us to really check all our checks and balances. Let's get real. Let's put the details into perspective. So it first may bring up some uncomfortable awarenesses, because none of us really want to take full responsibility when it means that we have to be accountable for bad behavior and bad choices. And again, you can change the narrative around that. Bad choices led me to learning the lesson, which lead me to changing the behavior, which lead me to better choices. So it's not, bad isn't necessarily bad, so to speak. It's something sometimes we need to go through in order to learn something. But if we don't become accountable and responsible, and actually my whole newsletter theme, if you read my newsletter this month, was on responsibility and accountability. So it's kind of a follow-on energy, because it's very much in the ethers. I mean, Pluto is adamant about, taking responsibility for your own karma and your own soul's path, and so is Saturn. So I definitely, and Saturn is in Pisces, which is a sign that can get a little bit out of ordinary reality, dreamy, dream surrealism, kind of like sometimes too idealistic and unable to create that practical reciprocity of the 6 of Pentacles. So we really do need to pay attention to the fears, the anxieties, the nightmares, but don't let ourselves get pulled right back into them to the point that we're not prepared to walk away. Rather allow them to facilitate, because if it was an ideal, perfect journey, which no journey, of course, is ever ideal and perfect without drama, but if we started with the 9, we would say, my fears and anxieties are getting so big that I realize I cannot carry on as I am, and I need to walk away from something. And once I've walked away from something, I'm looking for the new story. I'm looking for obviously, if this was upright, I'm looking for the new adventure. I'm looking for how to create the life, to write my own book, the new book, to jump pages, jump chapters, jump novels entirely, and do something differently. And if we can do that, we will start to see it materializing for us, which is what the Six of Pentacles is trying to offer us as a promise, as a reward almost for doing the hard work. And changing the mind is one of the most tricky and challenging things we'll ever have to do. Anybody who's ever tried any of that kind of work will realize that even when you start to understand where your patterns are, where your thinking is taking you off track, it's like in the dead of night when you're asleep that you wake up and those old stories are still looping in your head, or you react to something and as a default you go straight back to that inner critic where you call yourself an idiot or you blame it on somebody else or whatever your internal narrative has been. But each time that happens and you recognize it, you're changing the pattern. Each time that happens and you recognize it before you do it and you manage to pause and then try and think of a new thought, you're changing the pattern. And sometimes even when you go back to it, you're changing the pattern, because when you go back to it and you recognize, oh, it doesn't fit me anymore, I have to keep putting in the work to change the pattern. So I hope this makes sense. It is a very heady week. I can see that we'll all be definitely hooked into some old and new, but I have absolute faith in us. I have absolute faith in us. So have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another reading as we come off the back of the next new moon in Cancer.